Okay, can everybody see the slides? Super. All right, so this is our Fire for First Timers talk, and it's intended to be beginner friendly to give you some of the core concepts that are shared among people in the fire community, and just an overview of some of the key principles. And oops, as I'm sure you know, FIRE stands for Financial Independence, Retire Early. So financial independence meaning you don't need to work for money. You have all the money you need. And retire early, not necessarily meaning you'll never produce anything again. You may have things that you want to create or to nurture or to provide. And you might even get paid for that, but you no longer have to make those decisions based on money. You can do what you want to do. So a few examples in the fire community, you have people who will travel the world with their kids, or who build a co-working space for their self-employed friends, or who just hang out with their aging parents and go fishing. It's really whatever you want it to be. You could even keep your job, but now maybe you make different rules about how you're going to do it because there's no more dependence. You're independent. And I'm just going to assume that you already are sold on this idea, that you have something in mind or enough of an idea that this is appealing to you. We could have such a great talk about what everybody wants to do, and hopefully we will get to do that later, but this is really just a math lesson. And my intention is to answer this question tonight: when can I retire? And spoiler alert, the answer is probably in 10 or 15 years. But you might have to take a few actions. Shouldn't be too painful. We're going to talk about why I think this is true. I'm going to go over 3 key concepts: the 4% rule, savings rate, and index investing. So the 4% rule tells us how much money you're going to need. We also call that your FI number, your FI number, the point at which you have all the money you're ever going to need for the rest of your life. Savings rate tells us how fast you can get there. And then index investing is the most reliable strategy to grow and maintain your money. And the first 2 principles really only work with the index investing strategy. So I want to go through just a few caveats here and a few of my assumptions that I'm bringing in. Money beliefs can be so tough and so sticky. And I would love to do another talk around those, but this is really just about the math, not the psychology. And it's important that I also say this is not financial advice. Everyone has their own unique situation, and investment carries risk. So please don't take this as personal financial advice for you. Also, as I speak about the principles here, I'm really not going into the nuances. I'm giving you a generalized idea. Each one of these principles does have places in which it needs to be thought of a little bit more carefully. It might not be generalizable in every situation, but I just want to give you the broad strokes so you have something to start with. And I'm assuming that everybody on the call has middle-class income. You don't necessarily have to in order to pursue financial independence, but I think that's who we have in the group. And so that's what I'm assuming as I built my models, as I built my examples. And also, we are going to take our capitalist financial system as a given. I would love to get radical with you on another call, but for this, we just assume that this is what we're operating in. Now, biggest problem really you run into in looking at early retirement is healthcare. There are solutions, and within the fire community, people are figuring it out, but it's not generalizable, it's not universal. It's going to depend on many factors. So I can't get into that right away in this context. So just suspend your disbelief on the healthcare, please. And then finally, I'm going to be talking a bit about the financial management sector. And I might have financial advisors on this call. I don't know. I just want you to know that I'm not speaking about any individual. I just want to make some observations that are shared in the fire community about fund management and about the way the financial industry manages money and its results. So let's jump right in. First concept is the simplest one. The 4% rule states that you can safely withdraw 4% of your investments each year without running out of money. So however much you need, you're going to be able to use 4% of that. That's your spending in the small piece of the pie. And then the other 96% continues to grow. So it replenishes what you take out. So another way to visualize this is that you need to invest 25 times your annual spending in order to have enough to live on. So 4% being 1/25. And once you have that amount, 25 times your annual spending, you're financially independent. That's your FIRE number. So how do I know this? This is based on something called the Trinity study. It was a finance professors at Trinity University in Texas. And that was in the 90s. The modeling has continued to be tested as we've gotten more and more data, showing that at any point in the history of the stock market, that if you were invested and you were just withdrawing 4% each year, you weren't going to run out of money. You were going to wind up with more money than you started with at the end, so that it could last forever. This does account for inflation. And of course, it's relying on historical data, but that's what we've got. So here's the basic trajectory of the stock market. Why does this work? It works because over time, it goes up. It rises and it dips, but it goes up more than it goes down. So it replenishes itself. But we do need to talk about the elephant in the room. So what if in the future, the stock market goes down and it doesn't go back up? This is what scares people off from investing. Well, that is scary. We don't know the future, but what I can tell you is that if we find ourselves in that situation, the American economy will have ceased to function. So that's going to be a very different set of circumstances. We don't have data about that. So we can put that in a separate discussion. This is something we can talk about, how we might prepare for that kind of future, whatever that future would look like. But you might want to ask yourself, well, am I currently preparing for that other future? Or am I already, maybe passively, assuming that this is going to be what the future looks like? I'm just not taking advantage of the systems that run it. So I'll just say very briefly that if you do want to diversify and not just say, okay, all my money's going in the stock market, some of the popular ways to do that within this community, one is to become a landlord, buy some rental real estate. Another is to start some sort of business that doesn't really look like retirement, but it could be something that is not taking up all your time, is something that you would enjoy. And then finally, you could look into some homesteading, grow your own food, get off the grid. And we'll have to take that as a separate discussion. But if we do assume the continuation of the American economy as we know it, then 25 times your annual spending is your FI number. And if you wanted to be a little extra cautious, you could say 30 times, or you could say 35 times. So we could look at this from either side of the equation. You could say, all right, I anticipate that I'm going to get to 1 million, or my goal is to get to 1 million. And that means that I need to live on $40,000 a year. This is actually a benchmark in the FIRE community. You will see a lot of people who determine that that's what their spending is going to be. Your other option would be to say, okay, I'll look at my spending and I will multiply that by 25. So here I have the example of a much more expensive lifestyle, but not totally uncommon, $150,000 a year. In that case, you're going to need quite a lot more. So if you're ready to put your FI number at 3.75 million, then you can go ahead and keep spending $150,000 a year. So here's a few takeaways from this first concept, 4% rule. Number one, how much you need depends on how much you spend. Number two, reducing the cost of your lifestyle. Reduce how much you need in order to retire. Some people can retire comfortably with less than $1 million. So I think that can be a surprise to see that it really doesn't need to be a very high number. And then finally, that if you're going to maintain a high cost lifestyle, it's going to require a lot more investment. So that's all pretty self-explanatory. Next concept is a little bit more complex. But first, I just put down a few things that you might consider as first steps to implement this, to figure out what is your annual spending right now, and what is the current value of your investments, and what's the value after you subtract any debt. So elephants are back, pointing out that for some of us, our current value is negative. It's not uncommon to start this journey with debt, and it's not a game changer. Whatever your debt is, it's probably not $1 million. It's probably pretty small in relation to the fine number you're going to reach. So getting rid of your debt is just the first tiny little steps toward building that much larger FI stash. Okay, concept 2, savings rate. This is the percentage of your take-home pay that you invest. And this number is the number that drives how fast you're going to reach FI. So not your age, not your income, not your net worth. It's this number. So I'm going to spend some time trying to show mathematically and through some visuals why this is so. Let's take this example. This is actually data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, pre-pandemic, I thought was the way to go, 2019. So average American household, we have our earnings of about 78.6 thousand a year. After taxes, we were looking at 67. And spending apparently is around 61,000 with savings at 6,000. So savings rate, this is higher than I would have guessed, but this is what we're getting from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So we'll start here. Savings rate, 9%. So what happens? This is my favorite tool. I hope everyone will go and play with it after this talk. It's at this site, mustachecalc.com, and you have a time to financial independence calculator. So I plugged in the spending of this average American household, the 4% safe withdrawal rate I just talked about. I'm just starting from 0 in this model, current net worth at 0, and there's the savings at about 6,000. So I assume where we have interest here, I'm assuming the returns of the stock market at 8%, which is quite conservative. And then accounting for inflation at 3%, meaning that at the end of all of this, what you'll have is the equivalent of this number in orange in today's dollars. So if today's dollars, we have about 1.5 million, we account for inflation, and you will have the equivalent of what that gets you today. So how long, once we've plugged in all of this, how long is it going to take this family to get to financial independence? It's going to take more than 50 years. So that's not great. And we've all heard, at least I did, that 10% was a good amount to be saving. Well, it is if you're okay with working more than 50 years. And in fact, most of us wind up relying on Social Security. We don't actually get all the way to financial independence. So now let's experiment with this. We've got the same household, but we'll imagine that over time they've increased their earnings. Or maybe you've got two households that have combined their incomes. So this is where I said that, I'm going to assume middle class. I think this is not too unrealistic if you have maybe two earners, $135,000. So after taxes, now they've got 101 to spend. And let's assume that this family says, okay, well, we've increased our spending because now we've got more money, but we've really increased our savings. I mean, look, our savings are up by 50%. So we're doing great. We kept our savings rate consistent. What happens? Nothing. Because their expenditures have gone up as well. The consistent savings rate means that it's a consistent amount of time until they retire. It's exactly the same. So still looking at more than 50 years. In fact, it really doesn't matter what the absolute numbers are. They could be bringing in $500,000 a year, but if they're only saving 10%, it's still going to be more than 50 years before they can retire. So this is coming from net worthify, and their assumptions are a little different. So our numbers are a little different, but you can still see that on the x-axis, we have the savings rate, and on the y-axis, we have years to retirement. As you increase your savings rate, your years to retirement come down. And you can also see, at least in 2008, that the United States does a pretty lousy job in comparison to a lot of other countries who have much higher savings rates and much shorter working lives. So I wanted to visualize this in case it's not intuitive why this would be so. So here, this golden dollar represents your income, whatever that is. And now we're going to slice it into two components, your savings on the left and your spending on the right. So I modeled here a 10% savings rate, a 25% savings rate, and a 50% savings rate. So savings on the left, spending on the right. So when you look at that right side, the spending, in relation to what's on the left, the savings, you can see that at 10%, when you save 10% and spend 90%, you're spending 9 times what you save. If it's at 25% and you're spending 75%, you're spending 3 times what you save. And if you save 50 and spend 50, you're spending the same amount. So what does this mean? It means that it would take you 9 years to save as much as you spend in 1 year, if it's only 10%. At 25, it will take you 3 years to save as much as you spend in 1 year, and at 50, it just takes you 1. Now, this is not reality because we're going to invest. We're not just going to put money in the bank. But if we were to just put money in a bank account and try to get to this 25x phi number, well, at 10%, you'd have to save 9 years for every 1 year, and you're trying to get 25, you need 225 years. So you can see I've modeled this for 25% and for 50%, and it doesn't matter what the absolute numbers are. It's just this proportion between the savings and the spending. So now let's go back to the investment model where we actually do have the advantage of the growth. And we're taking this same household, but we assume instead of increasing their spending when their earnings go up, they keep their spending consistent with what it was at their earlier lower income. So earnings are now at 135%. You've got more than 101,000 to work with, but staying with that 61,000 spending. Okay, now you've got 40,000 available to invest. Savings rate is close to 40,000. Now how long does it take? Well, now it really starts to go down. Now we're looking at only 21 years until retirement. And we can go even further. We can say, okay, what if we made a few changes? In the earlier spending, it was about $5,000 a month for their budget. Now we could bring it down to $4,000. So you're just getting rid of $1,000 a month in expenses. We'll talk a little bit about how you might do that. $48,000 a month is your budget. Now the savings rate is all the way up to 53% with the money that's available from your after-tax income. And now we're already at 15 years. So we've made it to that 15-year mark that I promised as the outer edge. But there's probably some elephants worrying about whether this is really possible. How am I supposed to cut my spending in half? And why would I live this way? So this is another one that we can talk a whole lot about, how you go about cutting down your expenses. But I want to assure you that it is not about making yourself miserable and giving up the things you love. It's just letting go of the things that are not making you happy, and also not spending more than you have to for the things that you're getting now. So I actually did put a few ideas all onto one slide because this is not what this talk is about, but just to give you a little taste of what's out there. So key priorities that you must do as soon as you can to really get to know what you're actually spending. So reviewing your spending each month, and to stop paying for anything you don't actually use, like subscriptions that you never use. And then to tackle that high interest debt absolutely immediately. And then there are other things that you can change without changing your lifestyle. For example, most people, if they don't try to get their cell phone and their internet down, maybe paying twice as much as they have to. You might still be paying for cable. Who does that? Another one with groceries that you won't even notice the difference in how you live is just don't go as often. Eat what's in your house. If you just say, I'm going once a week, you might not get to eat apples for a couple of days, but you've got plenty of food. So then, of course, getting rid of shopping is a recreational activity and getting rid of impulse purchases. Now, when you're ready to make some bigger changes, then you start to think about things like, well, it's a little easier these days, but not eating out at restaurants, having friends over at your house instead of going out, not buying new cars, using things like travel rewards to make your travel more affordable. And then the big guns, that would be things like moving to a lower cost of living area or just moving to a smaller or more affordable home. But this just gives you a little idea of what's out there. But I said 10 to 15 years. Why did I say that when I've only shown you the 15-year example? Well, I had been modeling with a 0 net worth on every one of these examples, but you may be coming in with retirement accounts from work, or maybe you've done some savings already. So if you already have some invested here, I'm imagining 250,000, we've already got down to about 11 years. And then I was also modeling on the after-tax income. But if you're moving your money into pre-tax accounts, if you're using these tax advantage vehicles, there's more money available to invest. So pretty easily, I could add another 10,000 to what goes into the savings, and this moves us down below 10 years. So again, I put my little future topic icon on there because tax optimization is another great issue to dive into. And now we're back to the I don't have investment, I have debt. So let's look at what this actually means in terms of how the numbers play out. So once again, we're with the family that has gotten its expenditures to 48,000, but let's say they started out with $100,000 in debt. Well, they were at 15, now they're at 17. It's just an extra couple of years. It's not a game changer, it's just the first thing you do. And there are many ways in which you might be in a situation that's a bit better than what I'm modeling. You might be able to spend less, you might be earning a lot more, you may be able to optimize your taxes quite a lot more than we've done here, and you may have quite a bit more on your nest egg. Also, if you're over 50, you can take Social Security into consideration because that's going to be available to you. Much younger than that, we don't want to be too confident. But many ways in which this might be an overestimation of how far you are from early retirement. So for concept 2, how much you save matters only as a proportion of your income. A 10% savings rate probably means more than 50 years of working. But you can flip that around. A 50% savings rate probably means 10 to 15 years, maybe less. Okay, so a few questions to get you started here. Where exactly are you spending your money? By which I mean each and every dollar. Do you pay for anything you don't use or care about? How much longer do you want to work at your job? And are there some changes that would be worth making if they mean extra decades of your life? Recapping here, you need 25 times your annual spending in order to retire. That's our 4% rule. And savings rate, the one number that drives your pace. So I thought about just stopping here because this is a lot, but neither of these really work unless you use the index investment strategy. So this is the big one. We're going to dig in. I got to take a breath. Let's all take a breath. Okay. You can't beat the market. By which I mean not just you, the armchair investor, but the fund managers. Almost no one does. I'll show you a little more about that. So actively managed funds are what you typically get from financial management companies like a target date fund. You might have something like Fidelity Freedom 2040. So with these funds, the managers are picking and choosing. They're trying to find the winners and losers. They're trying to figure out which companies are going to outperform the others. And in contrast, an index fund just tries to mirror the market. It just tries to get the same returns as the market as a whole. So not trying to find the winners and losers, just buying the whole thing. A fire favorite is VTSAX from Vanguard, the Vanguard Total Stock Market Index. So here's our trend again. And what this actually is the S&P 500. So that's the 500 largest publicly traded companies. And this represents about 80% of the market as a whole. Here's a recent article from CNBC pointing out that yet again, active fund managers failed to beat the S&P 500. They did worse. And if you look at this bottom bullet point, after 15 years, 9 out of 10 of these managed funds with these experts picking and choosing did worse than the market as a whole. I had to put an extra slide in for this to sink in and also to visualize money going down the drain after 15 years. 9 out of 10 managed funds have lost money compared to the index. They can't do it. The best, most educated professionals out there can't do it. And it gets worse. So with the actively managed funds, the fees on the fund itself, like your target date fund, can be up to 1.5%. And then if you're paying a financial advisor to choose these funds for you, you may be paying them another 1%, whereas the index funds cost almost nothing. So with the Vanguard Total Stock Market Index, you're looking at 0.04%. So these might sound like tiny little numbers, 1%, but I'm going to show you why it matters. So here, a very, very simplified model. We've got an investment of $100,000 at year 0. So you've got $100,000, and the top line, the dark blue, is that 8% return from the market that we could reasonably expect over time. So with your managed fund, you would get worse performance, but we're going to pretend that you got the very same performance, but you're paying 1% for it. So instead of getting an 8% return, you get a 7% return. So that's the red line. And then below the turquoise, then imagining again that somehow you got that 8% performance, but you paid 1% to the fund and then another 1% to the manager. So now you've only got 6% return. So let's look at these totals. You would have had about $1 million with just the 8% return. You might get about $750 after you've paid the fund costs. And then if you're also paying that financial planner, now you're down to $550. So what looks like 1% or 2% over time can be about half your money. So here's another way to visualize how this works. The rule of 72 is a mathematical heuristic, a way of thinking about how quickly your money will double. So 72 divided by your average rate of return is the number of years it takes your money to double. So now when we compare 8% and 6%, we see why you get such a huge difference, because 72 divided by 8 is 9. Your money will double every 9 years. But with the 6% annual return, your money's going to double every 12 years, 72 divided by 6. So in a 36-year investment lifetime, with an 8% annual return, your money doubles 4 times at 9, 18, 27, 36. With the 6% annual return, your money only doubles 3 times at 12, 24, and 36. So 2% difference, half your money. So actively managed funds, worse performance, higher fees. Broad-based index funds, better performance, lower fees. I'm not getting anything from Vanguard for this. This is how we do it. But that's still not the end of it. Okay, a fiduciary is a person who is bound by law to act in his client's financial interests rather than his own. But guess what? Financial advisors are not necessarily fiduciaries. They're salespeople. They have to sell you something suitable, but there's not a lot of meaning or teeth behind that concept. They will sell you what earns them the most commission. They don't have to do what's best for you. Okay, so here's another elephant. But how am I supposed to do this? Well, I promise you, investing online is like shopping online. You just hit buy. Like, we could do a workshop and set up Vanguard accounts for you in 10 minutes. That might be a fun workshop to do and get you started. It's really, really easy. So takeaways here, you will almost certainly get better returns from investing in index funds rather than managed funds. You saw the numbers, 9 out of 10. And even if you did get exactly the same performance, your management fees are going to cut way into your money. And it's important to understand that financial advisors may not be doing what's best for you, and they don't have to. So when I talk about this, I tend to get one of two reactions. One is, oh, there's an American institution that is systematically designed to exploit people. That's no surprise. So that may be where you are. The other one is disbelief and sort of a cognitive block. So either way, it's a lot. But I want to share with you a real world example just to show you how this actually manifests. So what I have here, this is from Morgan Stanley to a client that is someone I know. I'm not going to show you their actual dollar amounts, what they have for the privacy, but these are the returns that the Morgan Stanley portfolio delivered. So actual printout that Morgan Stanley shared with the client. And this is from 2011 to 2019, and the top line is the most recent. So since I don't want to share what they had, we're just going to make a pretend portfolio. And let's say you had $1 million in 2011. So maybe you're retired, but you had Social Security, or your partner was working, or you had some kind of side hustle going. But we'll pretend that you just put your money in there and left it there. And then 8 years later, you've got more than 1.4 million. So are you happy? The actual client was. What's the problem? Well, on the left is what the Morgan Stanley portfolio got. On the right is what the S&P 500 got. When we compare this line by line, the performance is abysmal every single year. If the market goes up, the portfolio goes up less. If the market goes down, the portfolio goes down more. There are 2 years when the market gained and the portfolio lost. So what if instead of getting the portfolio's returns, you got the S&P 500's returns? We started $1 million, computed each year, point out a couple things. One, at year 2, you've already got more than the portfolio had after 8 years. And moreover, at the end of this period, you would have been leaving 1.2 million on the table. And retiring with 2.6 million is quite a bit different than retiring with 1.4. So this is significant. When I talked to this person about this, this was the response I got. I just want them to protect my money. I'm not trying to maximize. So let's look at what actually happens in a catastrophe. There were a few more lines on this printout. And remember, again, this is what Morgan Stanley shared. This is what they considered apples to apples. It did go down here in 2008. We all remember 2008. S&P 500, catastrophic drop, more than 37%. What happened to the portfolio? Was it protected? It most certainly was not. It went down even more. And look at the year above it, the following year, market rebounds. Portfolio barely goes up. So I share this not to depress you, but because this is great news, you know? Now you know how to grow your money so much faster. And I thought it was valuable to really look at the information that the finance company itself is putting out. Okay, if you're interested in this topic, this is a terrific book by J.L. Collins, The Simple Path to Wealth, very accessible, and it really walks through index investing. And if you're ready to start thinking about this, I suggest looking at where your money is now, maybe getting a printout like the one I showed you, comparing it to the market. Ask some questions or do some research online about how your advisor is compensated, and look at what kind of funds you have and whether you could be investing in index funds if you wanted to stay with that company. But you could also, even without getting rid of what you have through your employer, or maybe if you feel like you're friends with your advisor, you're not ready to do that, you could still open your own brokerage and start gaining confidence in how you can invest on your own. So now I hope you have some sense of why I said you could retire in 10 to 15 years. But I want to leave you with one additional thought. If you're like me, you may find that after, 6 years of saving half your income, it occurs to you that, wait a minute, I can live on half my income. That also means I could just work half as much. So once you start getting a real handle on your money, all kinds of options are available. You might decide that, hey, I can design a life right now in which I'm working less, I'm doing the things I want to do, I'm feeling relaxed, I'm feeling happy, and I'm already there. So I want to see if I can stop the video. Nope.